Hello, and welcome to the Transforming Loneliness interview series. I'm Laura Parker, the creator and host of the series. Transforming Loneliness approaches loneliness with fresh and unexpected ways of seeing and responding that cultivate connection, belonging, and love. Today, I'm thrilled to be with Kat Vellos. Kat Vellos is the founder of Better Than Small Talk. She is a facilitator and user experience designer who is passionate about community building. Since 2001, she's been leading community gatherings designed to connect people and foster community. She is currently working on a book about adult friendship and community. I love the way Kat weaves together her design skills and her longing for meaningful connection in a beautiful offering that builds healthy, life-affirming culture. Welcome, Kat. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for having me with you today.
Yeah. So, you and I had a little conversation before we started this interview, and you shared with me such a meaningful story about your own relationship to solitude and loneliness. And would you please share that with our audience?
Yeah, sure. So I love that question. What's the relationship to solitude and loneliness, and even the difference between them? It's something I've thought about a lot in my life. I identify as an introvert. It took me a while to fully accept that. I think when I was a kid, it was really, really apparent. And then in the middle, I had a lot of work that required me to be extroverted. So I thought I was extroverted and I was really exhausted. And then in the last several years, I've been realizing actually, no, I'm an introvert. And the ways that that has shown up for me in my life is that I've always been really comfortable being on my own, being in solitude. And I really needed alone time on a regular basis so that I could feel balanced energetically, emotionally, in many, many ways. And I loved spending time on my own and exploring the world alone and doing different things on my own. It just felt really natural and comfortable. And because of that, I didn't fully understand when other people talked about feeling lonely. I just didn't get it. I mean, I had, friends I needed in my life at that time, at those different times. And I just felt really content on my own. So I didn't really understand loneliness. And then another aspect of that is that most of the places I've lived in my life, I've lived in several different states and, through different phases of life, kind of moved around. And in most of those places, I had pretty easy access to friendship and community, like a group of people where I felt a sense of belonging. Sometimes too much. And again, I had to block out time to be alone or try to explain to people why I was going to go do this thing on my own or where I've been for a couple days. Um, and it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I had my first real experience of loneliness. And I had moved to the Bay Area in 2014. It was very exciting. It was the first time I ever fully moved somewhere where I didn't know anybody else, and I wasn't also kind of connecting right away to an existing community. It was really from scratch. But because I'd always had a pretty easy time making friends everywhere I went and finding community, I was like, oh, this will be so easy. And after almost a year here, I had a few friends. I had a lot of acquaintances, a few sort of friends, and my roommates, were my friends, but not close friends, not best friends, heart friends. And what the story is that it was Christmas, and I got really sick. I had a really terrible flu, and my roommates had all gone away for the holidays to different places. And any other time of year, when my roommates would go away, I was thrilled. I had the house to myself. I could be alone. And I felt really happy about that. But at that time where I was super sick in bed, and there was nobody around, and I didn't want to be alone. I'm not into Christmas or the holidays, but I just didn't want to be alone when I was sick. It was just so hard. And it was in that moment that it cracked open, and I was like, oh, this is what lonely feels like we're
Mm.
day after day, like whatever that holiday was, I felt alone. And it gave me this like awareness and like really deep empathy and understanding, like this is what people are talking about, this is what I've heard people say, but I never fully felt it so completely until that moment. And out of that experience, it really changed me. um, it really changed, yeah, it changed my perspective on a lot of things. And since then, it's been about 4 years since then. And there have been other times since then that I've felt lonely as well. Typically, it might happen when I want to spend time with people that I feel connected to, and they're not available. Uh,
Yeah.
like spontaneous, like trying to reach out, like maybe it's like you've had a great week and on Friday you're like want to spend time, but because you didn't plan and book with people's calendars like 2 or 3 weeks in advance, like actually no one's free. You're like, hey, what are you doing tonight? And everybody has plans. No one's available.
Yeah.
And so I really kind of equate loneliness with, wanting to spend time in connection with people and not having the ability to meet that need in that moment. And that moment might last a minute, or it might last days, or it might last weeks for some people. I have no idea. Maybe some people have felt lonely for years and years and years. I don't know. It's something that I've learned to cope with, usually by trying to plan in advance or knowing that if those spontaneous times come up, where probably no one's going to be available at the drop of a hat. Like I have other ways to use that time, and then adopting a spirit of like solitude and like joyfulness and like, well, what can I do for myself that I would really like with this free time? Um,
Mm.
it Yeah, it's really, it's something I've encountered more here than anywhere else that I've lived. Um, and interestingly, I've talked openly about it to people. I ask them, like, what do you do? Like, do you feel like you have friends? Do you ever feel like you don't know how to connect, or like you want community? And out of those conversations, I started realizing how common it was for many people. Um, and it gave me this idea to start my Better Than Small Talk project, which I can share some more about. But
Yeah.
does that sort of answer
Yeah. And
that question?
yeah, I I heard a lot in what you just said, and you mentioned that you found it harder here. And when you're saying here, you're talking about the San Francisco Bay Area where we both live. And so I can sit here and go, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But I'm wondering, if you have a perspective based on the fact that you haven't lived here that long, do you have a sense of why it's harder here in the Bay Area than it is perhaps in other places that you've lived? It's harder. When I say it's harder, I mean to feel that connection that you want.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of reasons, and it's mostly just based on my observations and my lived experience. Um, there's things I observe about the Bay Area. So one thing that I find, at least with a lot of people like in my age group, is that the Bay Area is a little bit of a transient place. A
Mm.
lot of the people I've met just got here also within a few years. And many people are going to leave here. They're going to move. This isn't where they're planning to like settle down. And so I wonder if that affects people's like emotional availability and like investment, um, in making like really deep connections, because they're like, oh, like I'm just here for a little while. Like I'm here to have fun. Um, and another thing about the Bay Area that's wonderful is that it's so full of incredible things to experience, like every day of the week. So people are very busy because they want to participate in like this really beautiful, thriving culture that we have here. And because of that, everybody has FOMO. And so there's the California maybe, where like you ask someone to hang out and they're like, yeah, maybe, yeah, let's do that. But it's not a commitment. And I think it's because a lot of people are kind of waiting to see like what's going to be the best thing to do at that particular day and time. And
Keeping their options open.
exactly. And I think that kind of erodes the sense of like commitment and investment. I talked to dear friend of mine about this because she's lived in very rural places and very city places. And in some of the more rural places, she said, like, when one thing is happening and you invite someone, everybody's like really into it and they're definitely going to show up because there's like nothing else to do. Um, and
Uh,
people like value that more than here, where it's like, oh, there'll always be an opportunity. So like, I don't really need to devote myself, too deeply to that. So I think that it's like a combination of all these different things, many of which are the flip side of positive attributes about the Bay Area. And I think the flip side is that it makes some of these things like connecting and forming like deeper friendships and connections more difficult. And I wonder if that's not just the Bay Area. If, I'm doing a survey about this topic, and I've had people respond from New York City who said the same thing, which is, of
yeah.
course, like another big place with a lot of great things going on.
Right. And so one thing that you mentioned that really stood out for me is transience and emotional availability and investment. And so these are things, this touches on an area that I'm very interested in, is these, what I would consider the invisible influences that are kind of playing out in our lives. But if we don't really pause to notice them, then they're just kind of in the driver's seat of our lives, so this thing about maybe not being so emotionally available because of transience, both because I might leave pretty soon, so I don't want to invest in you, or if you might leave soon, then maybe I'm going to be reluctant to invest in you. You know what I mean? But that kind of thing is probably not really happening in awareness. We're not aware that we're making those choices, but it just kind of plays out, you know?
Yes,
So,
yes, very much so, I think.
yeah, yeah. So, I've heard that you're writing a book about adult friendship and community. What was your inspiration for that?
Yeah, so um, after that Christmas passed in the story, I started thinking about this a lot, and like I said, like talking to people about it, and sort of formulating this idea of how can we help how can I help people make more fulfilling connections and have more fulfilling conversations? Another part of that transiency thing is that there's a lot of small talk. When everybody's new in a place, there's a lot of repetition to the conversations. It's like, where are you from? What do you do? It's like, oh, the weather. It's just like these like very repetitive conversations. I've not just seen it here, I've seen it in other places that I've lived that had some element of transiency to them. So I started putting together this idea of doing an event, a gathering that would help people come together and sort of get immediately into a meaningful conversation, like skip the small talk, just get to the good stuff. As an introvert as well, who gets taxed with social interaction, it's so much more fulfilling to spend that time having a great conversation than just chit chat, because I'm going to be the same amount of tired afterwards, no matter what. So it might as well be really worth it. And so I took my past experiences as a facilitator. I'd done a lot of community building programs through the work I was doing in Seattle. They were mostly nonprofit kind of youth arts, creative community programs. And so I knew from that experience that it was possible to create community even amongst a group of strangers if they share the same intention. And so I know that's really transformative. I know it's possible. And so I was just coming up with a way to do this with adults who had this shared intention of like, I want to have a great conversation. I want to meet new and interesting people, and I want to make new friends and form new community. That's something that's shared among everybody, I think, who comes to attend, better than small talk. And I've been doing those since 2016. And so in time, I started noticing patterns and trends. And um, I wondered, like, are there more people who care about this, think about this, can benefit from learning from the things I'm seeing? And I started writing like little essays about it and just kind of gathering my thoughts. And eventually I just had 10,000 words and I was like, maybe this wants to be a book. And so I started putting together this book about adult friendship and community. And it's all based on these same concepts, right? It's people want to have real meaningful connections and conversations. They want to feel a sense of belonging. They want to feel authenticity in their interactions. They put up with small talk, even if they really hate it. And a lot of people find it challenging to make new friends, and they feel it's kind of like maybe scary to admit that, because it's like nobody wants to feel like the kid on the playground that's like, oh, doesn't have like the kind of friends that, like, I don't know, popular kids have. And so it's very vulnerable to admit, like, I want friends or I want community, because it's not completely fulfilled in my life right now. And so I'm just trying to like crack that open, share more about my experience and the things I've learned from doing this project, and hopefully share some strategies to help people create more of that in their own life and feel like it's more accessible.
Yeah, fantastic. I hear what you're talking about, and it really dovetails so beautifully with this project, the Transforming Loneliness Project, because you're saying that people are reluctant to admit that they have a need for more friends. And what that dovetails with is this, what I've encountered is this reluctance to admit that we feel lonely, and it almost feels like there's this wall or this cultural taboo or social taboo around saying those words, because it feels like admitting some kind of personal failure, that somehow I haven't figured it out, I haven't done things right, or maybe there's something wrong with me and that's why I'm in this situation. And so people have, myself included, we have these self-doubts that then would cause us not to speak about our experience. And then, of course, that ends up creating more isolation because we're being very private with an experience that many of us in the same room are sharing the same experience. We're just not talking about it, So.
Yeah, very, very much. I completely resonate with that. And I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, so I'm so curious if you might be willing to share with me and with our audience just some of the things you've learned about how to cross that barrier. Like if I were to go to the ubiquitous potluck, next week, where I'm surrounded by some people that I don't know. And the questions that I would think of are, what do you do? Where do you live? And then those are boring questions, and I really don't want to ask them. And yet, if I ask a different question or I say a different thing, it might feel intrusive, like maybe that person doesn't want to be asked that question, or maybe they don't want to hear what I have to say. So there's this kind of hesitation around saying anything that's not small talk. And I'm just wondering what you've learned about how to cross that barrier into more meaningful conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. We talk all day long, especially if we're around people or we're going to social things like a potluck. And the words we say can either leave us feeling a bit stagnant or slightly disconnected, or they can deepen connection and feel really exciting and invigorating. And I think everybody wants an invitation to have that second kind of experience. And the simplest way to open that door, I mean, it's easy and it's hard. The easy part is it's only 6 words. Can I ask you a question?
Oh.
And that kind of invites the, consent on the other person's part to be like, oh, they're going to ask me a question. And it's maybe going to be something different than small talk. And then to ask a different question. It takes a combination of like willingness and effort to be, I call it the like 3 keys, right? One is be brave, the other is be vulnerable, and the third is be different. So being brave and saying, can I ask you a question? Which just checks, like maybe they're not into it. Maybe they'll say, actually, I have to run out the door right now. I don't have I don't have time, I have to go. But that helps because then not the right person, not the right timing, not the right setting. It's okay. You want to invest, right? Where it's going to actually land with somebody. The second one is be vulnerable. And I am still practicing and struggling with this, because I get asked those small talk questions and I feel the social pressure to just answer the question that got asked. Instead of saying, I'm trying to avoid having small talk right now, but I'd still love to talk to you. Is it okay if we talk about something else?
So
you
that's
know?
another question.
That's a
That's
way.
another question. Yeah. Is it okay if we talk about something else? I love it.
Yeah, and
Being
it's
subversive.
well, it's a little bit hard because it's like challenging that social norm of like, oh, we're just going to talk about those same 3 or 4 things that everybody talks about over and over again. Um, and it also, again, it's checking for, is this other person willing to join me in a new kind of experience? If they're not, or they're like super duper invested in getting the answer to their question, they'll probably say like, actually, I still really want to know, you know, what you do or like where you're from. Um, but I think people are curious. And I think that if you say that, they're going to want to know, like, well, what is it that you want to talk about? Or, you know, when I've tried it, people say like, well, what do you want to talk about? And then, so that third one, which is be different, is like, just ask something different. It doesn't have to be like super invasive or personal, but it can just be like, what's something that you liked about your week? Or like, what's something that's been on your mind lately? Another one is like, if you could do anything you wanted next week, what would you do? It's not invasive, but it helps a person share something that's a little bit more meaningful and kind of opens the door to learning something that's a little bit more core, I think, to who we are, what we think, maybe what's on our mind or what's on our heart. And that's when we really start to feel like we understand and see another person, and when we ourselves can feel more understood and seen for who we are.
Right. Right. And so this also brings, and I didn't, I don't know if you already answered this one, but there was the one that you said about being vulnerable. So it's not just asking questions, but it could also be saying, hey, there's something I want to share about, um, or maybe even saying something like, hey, can I tell you something that happened to me this week? You know,
Yes. Yes, totally. If you're willing to go first, it opens that door so that other people can join you in that vulnerable space and share something that's more personal to them. Yeah, I love that too. Because I mean, who hasn't been, you know, somewhere where someone's like, oh my gosh, I want to tell you a story. And you're just like, what is it? I'd love to know, because they're just so excited to talk about it and share it. And it's just so refreshing.
yeah. So great. Well, thank you for sharing those tips. I love that you've given so much thought to it about how to uh, do something different when you're in a situation where you're meeting somebody new, and how to cross that barrier. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something I think about literally every day. And it doesn't mean that I succeed 100% at it every day, but I'm constantly thinking about it, pushing on it, seeing where there's an opportunity to have a different kind of conversation.
It's very obvious how much thought you've given to this, and I am so grateful that you're doing this work, because the world needs it. And it also brings to the fore this that in order to change culture, it does really require our constant attention, because without our constant attention, the default, what always has been, is just going to happen again. And so it does require our vigilance and our attention and our intention to have a different kind of experience, which is exactly what you're speaking to.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So how might our listeners be in touch with what you're doing? And maybe you could also let them know what you're excited about and what you're focusing on in your work in the world these days.
Yeah. So there's a number of ways to find out more about it, or to learn more, to participate if people are interested and they're local. If anybody is in the Bay Area and wants to attend a Better Than Small Talk, they can go to the website, which is just betterthansmalltalk.com, and fill out a RSVP request form. So whenever there's an event coming up, they'll get a priority email that I'll share the information with them so they can secure a spot before I announce it publicly. And if they maybe aren't in the Bay Area but still want to share about this topic or connect about it, there's 2 options. So one is I'm doing a survey. This is, again, part of the research I'm doing for my book. It's a survey about friendship and community in adults, let's say over 21, or people outside of college. Because there has been a lot of really amazing research about how people make friends and find community, typically in undergraduate settings, which is entirely different for being a working adult. Um, And so if they want to share the survey, they can go to betterthansmalltalk.com and just click on community, and the link is right at the top of the page. And if anybody wants to have like a longer one-on-one conversation about this as well, they can just send me an email and let me know they heard about it here at Transforming Loneliness, and share anything about why these topics resonate with them, and I'll reach out and we can have a conversation. My email is betterthansmalltalk@gmail.com, and it's open 24 hours a day.
Wow.
So
Pat, you are rocking your talk. You are available.
thanks. Yeah, I really feel like it's a conversation that we need to have, and the more open we are about it, the more we will be able to transform that part of loneliness too, and to transform our relationship to the outside world in this way, and that just is just more fulfilling, I think, of a life experience for everyone.
Most definitely. Well, thank you so much for taking this time to be with me today. This has been a really exciting conversation. I'm going to be thinking about many of these ideas for the next days. And so thank you for just bringing this beautiful perspective into the world.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Laura. I wish we had more time, and I'm happy to share any other time you want to talk about it.